In 1881, Kintaro Hattori founded a small workshop in Tokyo with an audacious vision to challenge the centuries-old supremacy of Swiss watchmaking. By 2026, that vision has evolved into a calculated disruption of the entire luxury market, as Seiko transforms from an affordable alternative into a horological powerhouse that is fundamentally redefining the relationship between price and prestige. Today, we analyze the 5 strategic releases that expose the true psychology behind modern luxury, from high-stakes deep-sea engineering to the serene pinnacle of Japanese minimalism. This is the new era of Seiko. Welcome to Priceology. Watch 1 Presage Tonneau SBB 537. The Seiko Presage craftsmanship series has always lived in a particular world, understated, precise, beautiful, but in a way that takes a moment to register. The SBB 537 marks the return of the Tonneau case to the Presage lineup, a curved, barrel-shaped form that most brands abandoned years ago, not because it wasn't interesting, but because it is genuinely difficult to execute properly. This one doesn't struggle with that, it is excellent. The enamel dial is hand-finished by 2 artisans, Mitsuru Yakusawa and Kazunori Achiyama, and the design traces back to a Seiko pocket watch from 1895. The movement delivers 72 hours of power reserve. The case measures 46 by 35.9 millimeters, wide enough to command presence, compact enough to disappear beneath a jacket, and the price, approximately $1,600, becomes very difficult to argue with when you consider what it contains. A hand-enamelled dial, a shaped case, and a movement of this caliber. Now picture the person who finds this watch. He is not scrolling through social media seeking validation. He is the kind of man who reads about movements on a quiet Saturday morning. He already owns a diver, a field watch, everything he needs, but he has been looking quietly for something that belongs at a dinner table. He picks up the SBB 537, reads the card about the 2 artisans, puts it down, picks it up again, puts it down again, then buys it. He wears it for 20 years and passes it on for another 20. Here is what most people miss. The Tonneau case is not merely a design choice, it is a declaration. Seiko is not afraid of difficult shapes, difficult techniques, or difficult conversations about where the Presage line truly belongs. This is not an entry-level dress watch with a beautiful dial. This is a statement, a legitimate argument that Japanese finishing can stand beside anything emerging from Switzerland. The original design philosophy behind Presage was simple. The dial is the watch, everything else supports it. The SBB 537 may be the purest execution of that idea they have ever made. Strip away the shaped case, the enamel, the artisan story, and there is nothing left. Every element is load-bearing, and in watchmaking, that level of discipline is rare. One final detail, this is not a limited edition. Seiko made it a continuous production model. That tells you everything. They are not testing this idea. They are committing to it. What you just witnessed was Seiko at its most refined. What comes next is Seiko at its most audacious, a watch that went to space, then descended to the deepest point on Earth, and is now returning to your wrist for $550. Stay with me because the story behind this one is almost too extraordinary to believe. Watch 2, Rotocall SMG G21 in October 1982. Astronauts volunteered to wear a watch, not because NASA required it, but because they wanted to. That watch was the Seiko E829 Rotocall. One of those astronauts was Catherine D. Sullivan. She wore the blue and gray variant, the one that becomes the SMG G21 in 2026, on a mission 386 miles above the Earth. Then in June 2020, she wore the same watch again, this time 6.7 miles beneath the surface of the ocean, at the Challenger Deep, the deepest point on Earth. The same watch spanning the full vertical range of human exploration. That original piece later sold at auction for $21,420. In 2026, that exact lineage returns at $550. The mechanism is almost uncomfortable in its simplicity. No menus, no sequences, no friction. Rotate the 8-sided bezel until the function you want sits at the top. Press one of 2 buttons. Dual time, chronograph, alarm, timer, all accessible instantly, even with gloves on. 3 colorways. Blue and silver, red and black, yellow and black. The case is 37 millimeters, 10.6 millimeters thin, with 100 meters of water resistance and 3 years of battery life. Not limited, permanent production. Which signals something very specific. Seiko is not reviving nostalgia. They are making a bet that this interface is genuinely better than anything else on the market, smartwatch included. At $550, that is a very easy argument to win. There is a certain kind of person who will buy this immediately, not the spec-obsessed collector measuring lug-to-lug distances, but the other one, the one who wants a watch that works, looks different, and carries a story that actually matters. The Rotocall went to space. It went to the bottom of the ocean. Now it is going to your wrist for $550. That is an extraordinary sentence. Drop a comment below. Which colorway are you choosing? Blue and silver, red and black, or yellow and black? Watch 3, 145th anniversary. King Seiko SJ Eon 121. What comes next is harder to survive than space. 145 years of staying relevant. The 145th anniversary collection draws its design language directly from an engraving on Kintaro Hattori's original 1881 pocket watch. That precise quality of light at the moment before dawn, the transition between darkness and gold. Every piece in the collection carries that thread. King Seiko, Seiko Presage, Seiko Prospects, Seiko Astron, different personalities, unmistakably the same DNA. The piece the collector community keeps returning to is the King Seiko SJ Eon 121. A titanium case, caliber 6L35 inside, and a dial that shifts like a Tokyo cityscape depending on the light, restrained in the morning, luminous in the evening. That is not decoration, that is intention. At 46mm lug-to-lug and $3,300, that number carries weight, because King Seiko, for most of its history, lived between $300 and $800. This is not a price increase, it is a repositioning disguised as an anniversary. Take the entire collection together and one discipline becomes clear: gold accents across every model, never loud. That textured gray dial, expressed differently across every line. This does not feel like 4 separate design teams working in isolation. It feels like one conversation that has been happening quietly for years, and 2026 is where you finally hear the result. But the strategy is not without risk. For decades, people loved Seiko for one reason: value, that extraordinary feeling of receiving more than you paid for. And now that equation is changing. Collectors are noticing. Some of them are not happy, so the question becomes simple. Are there enough buyers who want what Seiko is becoming, regardless of what it used to be? 2026 is where we find out. Watch 4 Marine Master HB phone in 2024. If you wanted a serious mechanical diver from Seiko, your options were good, but not exceptional. The gap between Seiko and brands like Tudor or Omega existed, and the people who mattered noticed. In 2026, that gap closes. The new HB phone Marine Master, not limited, permanent, is powered by the caliber 8L45, a movement once reserved for significantly higher tier pieces. When a brand raises its baseline, everything above it must rise accordingly. At 42.6mm, 300 meters of water resistance, 72 hours of power reserve, an accuracy of +10 to -5 seconds per day, exceeding ISO standards by a margin that genuinely matters, this is not incremental progress. The dial is deep black, textured to absorb light so the indices appear to float. On paper, that sounds like marketing. On the wrist, it feels like craft. The HBF Tonneau is a collaboration variant. An Arctic blue gradient inspired by an icebreaker cutting through frozen ocean. The color deepening toward the center beneath a crystal so clear, it creates an impression of depth you feel you could fall into. Both pieces launch in July at $3,600, but at $3,600, you are no longer competing on specifications alone. Tudor carries Rolex heritage. Omega carries a century of tool watch history. Specifications are not sufficient at this level. Story matters, heritage matters, perception matters. This may be the single most important experiment Seiko is running this year. 4 watches, 4 very different arguments, but none of them prepared the watch world for what Seiko did next. There's a name that most people watching this have never heard. That is not an accident. It has been kept quiet deliberately for decades. What I'm about to show you is not a Seiko watch. It is not even a Grand Seiko. It is something else entirely. And in April 2026, for the first time in its history, the world finally gets to see it. Watch 5 Credor Kuon, the finale. Most people watching this have never heard the name Credor. That is precisely the point. Credor does not sit below Grand Seiko, it sits above it. This is the absolute apex of the Seiko catalog, pieces produced in numbers so small they almost do not exist. The Credor Ikai II. A time-only piece with a hand-finished movement that takes years of mastery to produce. The gold feather line, employing techniques tracing back to the Edo period. These are not competing with Rolex, they are competing with Patek Philippe. And for decades, nobody outside Japan was supposed to know. The Kuon, the centerpiece of Credor's Geneva debut. That dial is not printed. It is fired through multiple kiln stages, each one capable of destroying the entire piece. All it requires is a slight deviation in temperature. The failure rate is high enough that Credor does not discuss it publicly. But what survives possesses something that cannot be manufactured: depth, a quality of light that no camera can fully capture. You must hold it. And those who do not reach for comparisons. They do not reference anything else. They simply go quiet for a moment. April 2026. For the first time, Credor walks into Watches and Wonders Geneva, not as a footnote, but as a listed exhibitor alongside Patek Philippe, Cartier, and Audemars Piguet. That is not a small moment. Watches and Wonders is where the Swiss establishment makes its annual argument, why they lead, why they define luxury watchmaking. And now Credor enters that room with a counter-argument, not aggressive, not loud. Precise, measured, and unmistakably Japanese. Picture this: a saleswoman in Paris, 10 years selling Audemars Piguet and Vacheron Constantin, sees the Kuon dial for the first time. Something shifts quietly, no announcement, no visible reaction. But the next time a client asks, she recommends it. And that is how it begins. A name no one discussed becomes the one everyone suddenly does. Seiko is done hiding its finest secret. For decades, Credor was a trophy reserved for Japanese connoisseurs. Now the brand is asking the world a question it has long deserved to answer. Does Japanese haute horlogerie belong in the same conversation as Swiss? The answer has always been yes. Credor has always known it, and now, finally, everyone else is about to. Seiko is no longer just an affordable alternative. It has evolved into a horological powerhouse that is blurring the line between value and price. A brand once known for $50 watches now stands alongside Patek Philippe on the floors of Geneva. These aren't just products, they're a carefully orchestrated argument about what luxury truly means and who gets to define it. Which one is your favorite? Be sure to tell us in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deeper look into the psychology of watchmaking, craftsmanship, scarcity, and the real game between price and prestige, don't forget to subscribe to Priceology. See you next time.